Okay, so it's 10:07. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thumbs up if you guys can hear me okay. Great. So hello and welcome to everyone for joining us this morning virtually. My name is Heidi Sauerwein. I'm the program coordinator with the Indian River Lakes Conservancy. Today we are presenting the Indian River Lakes Conservancy's third annual Water Quality Conference. This is an annual event, and it's usually held at our Trailside Learning Center on our Redwood Hill Preserve in Redwood, New York. There will be an opportunity to ask questions today after each presenter. So you can do this 3 different ways. You can use your chat box. On a computer, your chat button is at the very bottom. If you're on your phone, you use the 3 dots at the bottom right. You can also use the raise hand function, or you can actually raise your hand and I'll see you waving to me. Then we'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So we hope that you will engage with our presenters today. As an icebreaker for today's event, I would ask that you practice using your chat box by typing in where you are viewing from today. So I see some faces that I know probably are not in our area yet. A few maybe that have just returned. So while you're doing that, I'm going to say a few words about the presenters today. Our first presenter is Wylie Huffman, Executive Director of the Indian River Lakes Conservancy. He will be giving an overview and discuss the future direction of the Indian River Lakes Conservancy's water quality program. After that, Lauren Townley with the DEC will present on Black Lake water quality. She will be discussing the DEC's water quality programs, historical water quality trends for Black Lake, and the current efforts to develop a clean water plan, or a TMDL, for Black Lake. After that, Liz Moran will follow Lauren. She is the president of EcoLogic LLC, a consulting firm located in Cazenovia, Madison County, New York. EcoLogic was retained by the Franklin County Soil and Water Conservation District on behalf of the St. Lawrence River Watershed Project to complete a Watershed Revitalization Plan. Liz will provide a brief update today and share some results for the Indian River Lakes watershed. So with that, I will hand it over to Wylie Huffman. Great to see you all today.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this year. A little bit different circumstances, obviously, than what we normally are having when we're out in our Trailside Learning Center. We have a great conference lined up for you. A couple of fantastic presenters. We had our entire conference ready to go. We had the agenda set. We had 4 or 5 presenters. We were going to do some hands-on stuff in the afternoon, do a invasive species walk, hands-on CSLAP testing, and a septic walk that we were actually going to physically do to break up the conference in the afternoon. So this is why you need to attend next year's conference, because pretty much our work in setting up virtually the entire conference has already been done. So we definitely are excited about next year for sure. So I am actually going to start sharing my slides, and we'll see how this goes. New skill I picked up here in the last 8 weeks or so. All right. There we go. Everybody seeing that? You should be. Great. Okay. All right. Another quick icebreaker. You can type in what lake you believe this is of our Indian River Lakes. And I think Heidi probably knows the answer. She might be able to acknowledge that in the chat box. But that's kind of your little trivia question for the morning. Okay, the Indian River Lakes Conservancy, we're a donor-supported land trust focused on protecting the natural character of the Indian River Lakes region. We have a staff of only 2, but we're largely very volunteer run. This photograph shows our kids camp volunteers. These are just a few of the 22 that we have help out with our annual kids camp. So all of our programming and our habitat protection efforts are thanks to our volunteers. We couldn't do it without them because really as staff, it's just Heidi and me. We pretty much make sure that the lights stay on and some sticks get picked up on our trails from time to time. But actually we do a lot more than that. But no, it's all due to our volunteers, all of our success. So a lot of them are logged on today. So thank you very much for everything you do for us. These are the 4 touchstones of the IRLC, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this spring's experience that we've had and focus on the forever, or as in land trust talk, we like to say for perpetuity. Our trails during the pandemic saw unprecedented foot traffic. It was a great opportunity for our community members to exercise and to enjoy connecting with nature and to recreate virtually while our entire society was shutting down. Our trails were able to remain open. And I think that is a huge testament to what land trusts can provide our communities with. And it just shows you the importance of what forever is, because in the future, there will be a future crisis or whatnot, and people will turn back to the land for their healing and ability to relax. And not to mention, that's just from a human perspective, not to mention from a wildlife perspective, the wildlife's dependence on uninterrupted habitats and ecosystems forever. So that's what we're all about. This is the Indian River watershed. You see the highlighted portion of this map in green. The Indian River begins down in the lower right-hand portion of the map in the town of Croghan. It flows through our Baker Woods Preserve. I'll put these animations on here. It flows through our Baker Woods Preserve, across Fort Drum there, and then through the towns of Philadelphia, Theresa, Alexandria, Rossee, and the town of Hammond. The Indian River then dumps into Black Lake. Then the outflow of Black Lake, it joins the Oswegatchie for a couple of miles before it dumps into the St. Lawrence River. IRLC's a land trust, but we're unique because we focus on not only protecting land, but also protecting the water quality of our lakes and river. And the two obviously go hand in hand. We currently protect about 2,500 acres in fee-owned property. Our 3 public access preserves are the red stars you see on there. We have about a little over 20 miles of hiking trails as well. Why we conserve. These bullets here are why we are all here today. And you see the photographs. There's recreation, fishing and paddling. There's wildlife, there's scenic views. And think about the impact if we had our hazardous algal blooms or invasive species threat became to the point where we couldn't do these things, where we would be. And it would not be great. We couldn't take our kids fishing. We couldn't go paddling. We couldn't enjoy the views. Property values would not be where they are. Our recreation economy, which is a cornerstone of Northern New York's economy here, would be definitely devastated. You look at everything in these photos and on this list, even the COVID pandemic couldn't take these away. So they were here for us, and with maybe the exception of our health or some that contracted the virus, but everything else is here, and it will be here in perpetuity. And that's why we're here today, to figure out how we can steward our watershed, to continue to learn how to steward our lands and water. We'll cover a number of these stressors today. I would say the top four: agricultural runoff, septics, water treatment plants, and storm runoff will be a large part of what Lauren's going to cover in the Black Lake Nutrient Diet Plan. But these are the things we always need to be cognizant of and keep our eye on when protecting a watershed. And the more that we can learn about each one of these subjects and how to reduce the effects in our watershed is what we need to do to ensure our waters remain healthy. And talk a little bit about some of our programs. Obviously, our adult education program, this is last year's water quality conference at our Trailside Learning Center here at Redwood Hill. We have our school programs. We have all kinds of school groups that normally are coming to our trails, and we've developed, our education committees developed curriculums that are focused on teaching kids the importance of sustaining our water quality, and very basic steps. Here you see kids gathered around a watershed model, and two basic concepts, many of which that will kind of guide us through today, through our entire discussion that we teach kids on watershed modeling, is one, what we do on the land affects what happens in the water ultimately. It all gets washed into the water. And the second is what happens upstream affects everybody living downstream. And if we all think about those two principles, even though they're so basic, our watershed will be a better place if we keep that in mind in how we treat our lands and waters. Our kids' camps connect kids to nature and continue to stress the importance of caring for our environment and the importance of water quality. There's another watershed model table at Fort Drum at the Outdoor Environmental Awareness Days, in which we had about 600 kids come through our table over a period of 2 days from all of our North Country school districts. There we have Heidi and Patricia from Save the River. Patricia came out and did an adult presentation on identifying benthic macroinvertebrates and assessing the health of our waterways by looking at what's living in our streams. And then our last programs, our signature program down here in the lower right, Project Whirl. It's working to get high school kids in touch with their environment and getting them out actually working with their feet wet, learning how to steward, be better stewards of the environment. And where we're headed, we're focusing on improving our outreach and communications for our lake associations so that we can be a better community resource, so that we can share lake association successes and challenges. As we did a meeting about 6 weeks ago with our lake associations, in which they submitted their project ideas to support the St. Lawrence River Watershed Project. And what we learned is the threats to those lake associations, from what they could see, were pretty common. And they were dealing with, for instance, Eurasian water milfoil. Different lakes were taking different approaches in containing that and controlling that invasive species. So the more knowledge that we can share and the opportunity to bundle these challenges to leverage for grant resources and support is great. So we're going to continue to develop our relationship with the lake associations. We're implementing research that's already been done. We're taking a look at our lake management plans, and we have 5 lake management plans developed by SUNY Oneonta. These lake management plans have tasks in them that really need to be being implemented in one way or another. And we're looking at reaching out to our lake associations, for lake association volunteers, for IRLC volunteers, and then eventually taking the tasks in these lake management plans and working it into our Project Whirl curriculum. That's our high school program, and getting our high schoolers out working with the other volunteers. That's multi-generational stewardship. That's what we really need as a community, and it's what our waters need with the environment as well. involving experts. Our network of experts is expanding. We have folks at ESF, Paul Smith College, Adirondack Watershed Institute. Just yesterday, Heidi and I spent an hour on the phone with a professor from Clarkson University who's an expert in Eurasian water milfoil. And she's agreed to work with us and our lake associations in figuring out how to control the spread of milfoil, which is a common threat to all of our lakes. So very exciting. And I expect she'll be a speaker and presenter at next year's Water Quality Conference. So we're very excited to be linking up with her. And of course, teaching our children. Our children are our future. We're working to expand our relationship with all of our service area school districts. This year, Project Whirl was picked up by Indian River School District to be a 96-hour summer school credit where the kids were doing learning watershed management out in our rivers and on our lakes while achieving a high school credit for that. And we hope to eventually take that up to the next level where kids will be able to achieve a college credit as well. So that's the direction we're heading with that. And then of course, by doing all of this, we're supporting the St. Lawrence River Watershed Revitalization Plan and Black Lakes Pollution Diet, which is what our speakers will talk to us today about. And then as we learn all of this, we're looking to develop our own watershed management plan or a 9-element plan for our own watershed. I know Lauren Townley, who's following me, we had a great conversation on the direction that our watershed needs to go a couple of weeks ago, and we did a rehearsal for this. So great things it's a bright horizon. We're moving in the right direction. So before I turn it over to Lauren, does anybody have any questions of me? Nothing? Okay. I will work on giving my screen sharing rights to Lauren here.
Wylie, what lake was it?
Oh, that was Pleasant Lake. Yep, up in St. Lawrence County. It's a beautiful lake, as they all are.
Is with the summer school programs for Indian River being canceled, as far as I know, is Project Whirl still happening this summer, or is that kind of still to be determined?
Yeah, great question. Yes, Whirl is happening. Will likely be, obviously the kids will not be coming together, but we will be having registration, and they will be going out to explore the watershed and to work on different projects. We're going to have an intern this summer, actually we're calling it a watershed steward that will kind of guide these kids, set up the programs, tell them what to look for. They'll be connected with him on virtual network, a Zoom or whatever, or FaceTime or whatever, and they'll be out looking for different fish, critters, whatever in the environment, and saying, hey, what's this? Oh, well, that's an eastern mud minnow, and this is what it's neat about it. So that type of thing, I don't know how it's going to go. We've never done it before, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to give the kids a great program despite not being able to come all together. So great question. I think that was Laura. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to chime in for a second. The registration is open for Project Whirl, so if you know a high schooler who would be interested in joining the program, shoot me an email and we'll get the information to you as well.
Yep. I'll also say along those lines that our kids camp is also going to go forward this year as well. It will take place at the household level, household and family level. We're preparing a tote of activities for the kids to take out with them, and giving them a map, and basically giving the children and their families or guardians the opportunity to take them out on our trails to explore and learn in a bit more decentralized format than what we normally do. So it's interesting times. Okay, I am going to pass it over to Lauren. All right,
All right.
a little bit of virtual gymnastics here. Bear with us.
Can everybody see my presentation?
Not yet.
Or can you see my desktop at all?
Not yet. Wylie, have you made her a co-presenter?
Yep, I believe so.
Okay, hold on just one second. There we go.
Okay.
Now can
Yay.
you-
I see your
okay.
screen.
Good. Just give me 1 second. All right. Can you see it now? Awesome. Great. So thank you everybody for joining today. And I just want to say thank you to Heidi and Wylie for inviting me to present at the conference. You know, I was hoping that we could do this in person, but I'm glad that we were able to still have this over a webinar and get this information out there. So just thanks to you guys for setting this up. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about Black Lake, but Black Lake is one of over 16,000 ponded waters in the state of New York. So we're very lucky in New York to have so many different water resources. And a part of DEC's responsibility is to monitor and collect data on all of those different water resources across the state. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of our programs that have been ongoing for quite a number of decades. But one of the most important programs that DEC shares responsibility with the New York State Federation of Lake Associations is the CSLAP program, and that's the Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program. Black Lake has been a part of that program since 1988, and volunteers have been collecting water quality information for Black Lake since 1988. So that gives us a really great baseline historic information for the lake so that we can track trends over time and come up with different ways to implement practices on the landscape to help protect the lake. A second program I just want to highlight is our Lake Classification Inventory Program. So that's DEC staff that are specialized in collecting data for lakes. They go out on a rotating basis and collect information, and that supplements the information that's collected through the CSLAP program. A third program is our Harmful Algal Bloom program. So this is a fairly recent program over the last 10 or so years as the incidence of harmful algal blooms have increased, and we've been increasing the number of samples and the detection of harmful algal blooms across the state. We now have a more comprehensive program where we partner with Department of Health and the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation to track and report and do research on harmful algal blooms. The last program that we have that collects water quality information is our PEERS program. And this again is similar to the CSLAP program in that DEC trains volunteer outside organizations to collect water quality data on rivers and streams. And all of this information from these multiple programs are used by DEC to conduct assessments of these waters and come up with different implementation plans that are required under the Clean Water Act. So that information that's collected through those programs, DEC uses it to evaluate the best uses of lakes and rivers and streams. A couple of different best uses that a lake can be designated as is a public drinking water supply. So you might hear a Class A water as being designated for public drinking water. Class B waters like Black Lake are designated for swimming, fishing, boating, and general recreation. And there's also best uses related to fish, reproduction, and habitat. So when we look at the information collected through our water quality programs, we're evaluating whether or not water bodies are meeting their best uses. So there's a couple of different parameters that are collected that we use to evaluate those best uses. And this information was pulled directly from the 2018 CSLAP report, and that's available on our website. There's a link on the slide right here if you want to check out that report. But one of the parameters that we use to evaluate water quality is water clarity. And you can see in this little graph, there's a series of Secchi discs, which are the tool that are used to measure water quality from a boat. And you can see the Secchi disc readings for Black Lake have historically fallen under what we call the eutrophic zone. So eutrophic lakes are characteristic of low water quality, low water clarity, high nutrients, a lot of macrophyte growth as well. So those have historically been in that zone. Another indicator is the chlorophyll A concentrations. So that's the amount of basically photosynthetic algae that's in a lake. And again, most of the readings are within that eutrophic zone. The areas of the lake that are super shallow, you'll see a lot more of the algae growth in those parts of the lake as well. And the other indicator that we look at is summer concentrations of total phosphorus in the lake. And this is a really important nutrient because it essentially fertilizes the lake. So when you see a lot of high total phosphorus concentrations, the result of that is a lot of algae growth, a lot of macrophyte growth, and that will affect your water clarity. So consistently, total phosphorus has fallen into the eutrophic zone for Black Lake. And just a side note on our HABs program. So when you have water quality such as high phosphorus and high chlorophyll A, that's usually an indicator that you could potentially have some harmful algal blooms. So these types of species of algae have been present in lakes for centuries, really. And there are certain conditions in which they bloom or become into concentrations where it becomes visible. So you'll see in some of the brochures that we put together, it looks almost like spilled green paint in some cases. And these type of algae can potentially produce toxins that are harmful to both people and wildlife or pets. So because this has become an increasing issue over the last couple of years, specifically, we're seeing many more blooms happening in lakes that had previously not had blooms, or we're seeing lakes that have had blooms in the past, but the blooming season has been extended. So they're blooming earlier in the year and maintaining their bloom into later in the fall because of warmer weather and other conditions that they really like. So DEC has partnered with, again, Department of Health and OPRHP to track and report these type of blooms. And there's a link on the bottom of the slide that will bring you to DEC's website. We've released a new online ArcGIS-based tracking and reporting mechanism. It's called NIHABs, or New York HABs, and it will show point locations of where people have reported harmful algal blooms. And there's also a mechanism to actually take a picture of a bloom if you see it in a lake that you're visiting, and you can upload the photo. It will go to a DEC staff person. They will review it and confirm whether or not it is a bloom or not. And then it will be reported on that map. So if people are going out and visiting places, they want to check out that map ahead of their trip, that they're aware that it exists. There's also, DEC has produced signage and program guides so that there's a public education outreach component so that people know what to do when they do see a bloom, and generally telling people to avoid them when they do see them. So getting into the total maximum daily load, or the TMDL for Black Lake. So this is a regulatory mechanism that DEC has to go through as part of the Clean Water Act. So when a lake or a stream or other type of water body has been determined that it's not meeting its best use, we will give it an impaired designation, and it will go on to what's called the 303D list of impaired water bodies. So this is an ongoing inventory of water bodies in New York that are considered impaired for not meeting their best use. And once a water body is listed on that list, then DEC is required by the Clean Water Act to complete this Clean Water Plan, or TMDL. And basically the TMDL is a calculation of how much a pollutant a water body can accept and still meet a water quality standard that is associated with its best use. So we refer to it as a pollution diet often, or a nutrient diet if the pollutant of concern is a nutrient. Predominantly in New York, we produce TMDLs that are related to nutrients, so either phosphorus or nitrogen. And for Black Lake in particular, phosphorus is the pollutant of concern that we are working on developing a TMDL for. Basically what this process looks like is that we identify different information to set up the TMDL. That includes land uses in the watershed. So we produce maps of the land uses within a watershed area. It includes all the water quality sampling data that we've collected. So lakes that have that historic sampling record, like Black Lake, makes it a lot easier for us to develop a TMDL. So just want to give a shout out to all the volunteers that have been working on the lake since the 80s, because we were able to initiate this process pretty painlessly because we have all this data available to us through the CSAP program. And the other types of information that we include in the TMDL, so we look at on-site septic systems because that can be a source of phosphorus. Any wastewater treatment plants that are permitted through DEC are required to monitor for phosphorus, so we'll include that information from those treatment plants. Rainfall data, weather data in general is really important because rainfall will influence the amount of nutrients coming off of the landscape. Again, land topography and soils information is also really important because that influences your runoff. And we also will collect information on the lake itself, so the bathymetry of the lake. There's natural processes in the lake that affect the nutrients that are released from the bottom sediments. So bathymetry is really important for us to incorporate into the modeling. And then we look at flow and influx of nutrients from tributaries. So there's a lot to collect up front, and we're working through that process right now. So one of the easier pieces of the TMDL to collect is land use. So we have a pretty good idea of the land use. So this is the watershed boundary for Black Lake, and it's predominantly forested, over 70% forested, and smaller amounts of agriculture and development. But this also will help us when we develop the implementation plan in terms of where we're going to be targeting practices on the landscape to reduce nutrients. So this is just an example of what the product of the TMDL will have in the actual plan. This is just an example that this has not been created yet for Black Lake. But what we will do is try to estimate the amount of pollution from various sectors, whether it's from agricultural, developed forested areas, wetlands, septics, and then internal loading can be significant. So that's the natural processes I was talking about in terms of the release of phosphorus that comes from the bottom sediments under certain conditions where there's low oxygen at the bottom of the lake. So once we've determined the amount of pollution coming from various sources, we develop an implementation plan, which is a plan for how we are going to reduce the amount of phosphorus from those various sources in order to meet the water quality standard that we're trying to achieve. So implementation can happen in a couple different ways. So DEC will use regulatory programs such as our permitting of wastewater treatment plants or our construction stormwater permit to reduce nutrients that way. But predominantly in some watersheds, and Black Lake is in this category, most of the pollution is coming from non-regulated sources, so which we consider non-point sources. So any implementation will be done on a voluntary basis, and when we develop the implementation plan, because it is predominantly going to be comprised of voluntary practices, we would like to get a lot of input from local stakeholders on what type of practices are feasible to be implemented, what people want to see going in on the landscape, what people are willing to do in order to reduce the phosphorus going into the lake. So a couple of different phosphorus reduction options across different sectors. So we can look at fertilization rates, and luckily New York has a reduced phosphorus law. So fertilizer is required to be marketed and marked as low phosphorus, and there's low phosphorus options or zero phosphorus options available at places like Home Depot or Lowe's, so that people can make the decision to use low phosphorus or no phosphorus fertilizer for their lawns. There's also best guidance on how and when to fertilize, so that people are not, one, wasting fertilizer, or using it appropriately so that there's not increased input of phosphorus into lakes. A couple of other things that could happen related to septic systems. So we can either replace or maintain existing septic systems if they're determined to be in a place that they're appropriate. There can be recommendations for sewering around lakes. So if there's a number of properties that have failing septic systems, and there's a treatment plant that can accept the waste from those individual properties, then we might recommend sewering the lake in order to reduce that input of phosphorus. There's different stormwater practices that can be implemented, including green infrastructure practices, so rain barrels, rain gardens, bioretention, to reduce and infiltrate stormwater that does carry phosphorus into water bodies. A big thing that we really want to promote is water body buffering. So buffering of streams and lakes, where you plant shrubs, trees, grasses next to water bodies. Those trees and other types of vegetation actually slow down water. They will hold the sediment and reduce erosion of those stream banks and shorelines. And they will also filter out nutrients from stormwater that's coming off of the landscape. And they're generally very cost effective, and they have extra benefit in that they can reduce water temperatures because they create shade for the water, and then they provide extra wildlife habitat. So buffers are one of our top best management practices that we like to promote. Again, we can, through the TMDL process, DEC will have the authority to reduce phosphorus loads from regulated point sources, such as wastewater treatment plants, and then working with the agricultural community to implement best management practices to reduce runoff from crop and pasture land. And this is just a quick slide. So there's multiple sources of funding to fund implementation practices. So DEC has a couple of different programs. The Department of Ag and Markets, we work really closely with them. They provide funding for farms specifically to reduce non-point sources. The federal government, there's a couple of different programs through USDA that helps farmers as well. Fish and Wildlife has programs. So there's a lot of help out there to help fund these practices so that people aren't having to pay for them out of pocket on their own. And there's a link to our website where we like to keep a running list of all funding opportunities that we're aware of. So just a couple of next steps for the TMDL process. So we are in the middle of collecting some intensive data to support the model for Black Lake. We should be in the last year of sampling. And once that's done, then we'll start analyzing all that data and start modeling and associating the loads with those different sectors. So that will lead to a watershed model where we look at the different land uses, and then an in-water body model where we look at the internal loading within Black Lake itself. Then the next step, once the model is completed, we will draft up a document and release it for public comment. And we'll have a series of public meetings where we will, present the plan and answer any questions that the public has, and then get any input into the document itself. Once that's completed, we'll address all the public comments, and the final draft then goes to EPA for final approval. Once EPA approves it, it's posted on our website, and then we prioritize actions that are highlighted in the implementation plan for funding. So that's really important to know that TMDLs and 9-element plans, specifically when they're completed, those watersheds then get priority for funding from multiple state agencies and also from the federal government. So it shouldn't be looked at as having a huge weight on you. If you have this plan, it's there to sort of guide what the next steps are going to be for improving the water quality for Black Lake specifically. So that's all I had, and this is my contact information. If anybody has any follow-up questions and they think about this later on, I think this will be the first of many different meetings that we'll have related to Black Lake as we go through this TMDL process. So this is sort of just the beginning of the interaction. So definitely available to talk more about Black Lake specifically, or clean water plans in general if people have questions. So just want to thank everybody for joining again. And I think if anybody has any questions, I'm gonna see if I can see the chat and move over to that.
Or you can go ahead and take your share screen off.
Okay, let me try to do that.
And if anyone has any questions, you can use the chat box. You can raise your hand.
This is Wylie. Yep, I'll start off. Hey, Lauren, can you explain the difference between what a TMDL plan does, and what a 9-element plan, and what a basic watershed management plan? This is something we're kind of grappling with, is which direction we need to go when we develop our own plan. And if you could kind of provide the highlights and what the pros and cons are, and maybe potential for funding sources for the different plans as well, would be appreciated. Thank you.
Sure, I can definitely try to answer that question. So I'll start with the basic watershed plan. So these are typically funded through Department of State, similar to the one that's being developed for the St. Lawrence right now that Liz is going to talk about. And those plans generally will do a lot of the background information that's also required for a 9E plan or a TMDL, where they'll look at the landscape, the land uses, summary of water quality information could be in there, summary of partners, and opportunities for implementation are generally in those water quality plans. Where they sort of differ from either a TMDL or a 9E plan is that a TMDL is required to have a water quality target, a numeric target, and it has to be based on a water quality standard that's in DEC's regulation. So typically for a lake, it's 20 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. So we have to complete a water quality model where we show how we're going to get down to that level. Similar to the TMDL and 9E plan, we'll also be required to do a water quality model and have a numeric target. It doesn't necessarily have to be based in regulation. It could be based on whatever goal the local group that's completing the plan wants to get to. So that's sort of where they differ. The TMDL is the only one that gives DEC regulatory authority to modify permits. So that's why for when it's listed on the 303D list, New York DEC is required to complete a TMDL. You can complete a basic watershed plan or a 9-element plan for any water body. It does not have to be listed on the 303D list. It could be any type of water body that a local group will want to protect or come up with a plan to help restore. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's a lot of nuances to all of these different plans. We have some information on our website on our 9-element plan page that kind of compares the differences between at least a 9-element plan and a TMDL if people are interested.
Thanks, Lauren. George Cable has a question for you.
Okay. Hi, Lauren. George Cable, Millsite Lake. I do have a question relative to who owns the lakes. I know you have the riparian rights for property owners, but when it comes to owning the lake and who is the primary responsible party for maintaining lake quality as well as the enforcement authority. The process you just described seemed to be very reactionary, where the DEC gets very much involved after a lake has not been able to qualify for their best use.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the lakes that are trying to maintain quality year in and year out and don't fall outside of the best use practices? What's the DEC's involvement to help property owners maintain lake quality? My experience has been it's always up to the lake property owners to fund whatever they're doing to try to maintain lake quality.
No, that's a really good point. And you're correct that that's traditionally been sort of the perspective on when DEC, because we're required by the Clean Water Act to do actions when water quality declines or, as you stated, gets out of its best use. Where we're sort of moving, especially with these 9-element plans where DEC does provide support for the development of them, is that we're pushing for those type of plans to be in place for water bodies that are not impaired yet, that still have maintained their best use, but that, again, there needs to still be some actions on the ground to maintain that level of high water quality. So when we complete a 9-element plan, there's only been a few that have been completed so far, but there's many that are in development right now. When we, at least for DEC's funding, we consider them equivalent to a TMDL. So then those landowners or people that are in the watershed that do want to do implementation can do that and still receive the funding and still receive priority.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
We have a couple more questions from the chat box. We have a question about whether the DEC is willing to help the water quality by using alum to allow the lake to refresh itself.
That's a good question. So alum is a chemical treatment that you can apply to lakes, and it will it basically attaches to the phosphorus and will precipitate it out of the water column. And you generally will see an improvement in the lake after an alum treatment. So right now, DEC is piloting alum treatments in a couple of different lakes, and we're in the development with our Environmental Permitting Bureau to develop a permitting process. Right now, we don't have one in place to allow for the alum applications, but that will be coming hopefully in the next couple of years so that we can allow for those type of treatments for lakes where it is appropriate.
We have another question from Jacob Ball. He said, has the DEC done any testing for BMAA toxins in lakes that have issues with HAB?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would have to refer that question to our harmful algal bloom coordinator, but I can definitely take that question back and get back to you on that.
And a question from Wylie, just asking about why the CSLAP data is so important for monitoring water quality on our lakes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the ability of the CSLAP program is that we get annual data collected on these lakes. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there's over 16,000 lakes. So if DEC was solely able, or the only entity collecting data on these lakes, we do it on a 5-year rotation. So you would, you miss years of data and what's happening in the lake by just relying on DEC staff to collect that data. So it's more of a capacity issue for DEC. We do have a really good team of people that go out and collect data, but they have to cover the whole state, and they're just not able to be in every lake every year. So by having the CSLAP program, we have trained volunteers that are able to collect the same information that DEC would be able to collect. And then we get that annual continuous sampling, which is really important, again, for the development of the TMDLs or any type of assessments. We're able to rely on that annual variation that we can see in that data.
Does anyone else have any questions for Lauren?
There was just one question that said, could you, if I could post the web address for the listing of the funding sources? And yeah, absolutely. I can put it in the chat so that people can see it.
I will also follow up with an email following this presentation with some information like that. Well, thank you so much, Lauren.
I think
That
there's
was a
just
great-
one more question in the bottom of, somebody said, where could a person collect information on other lakes water quality? So I can also post a link to our website where we post the CSLAP reports for all the lakes, and then the reports from our LCI program as well. They're all available on DEC's website.
Jim, did you have a question for Lauren? You just have to, yes, there you go.
Received an email from, she referenced that we are going to be starting our sampling again, but she didn't really give a specific date when we should sort of look forward to going in there. Do you have any information that goes along with that?
No, I think you would have to contact Stephanie June as the CSLAP coordinator.
Right.
Just send her an email. I know things have been a little, obviously this is an unusual year for sampling, but they have developed some specialized protocols that I think they're going to release to volunteers on how to still collect the data, but following social distancing procedures and being safe related to COVID. So. But Stephanie June is definitely the person that could point you to that information.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions from Lauren, we can move on to Liz's presentation. And again, you can connect with Lauren through her email, or if you want to use the IRLC to connect with Lauren for any questions that come up later, feel free to do so. So thank you, Lauren, very much.
No, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren. Great.
And Liz, when you're ready, you can go ahead with your presentation. Wylie, have you made her a co-host?
No, it says that my screen sharing is disabled.
I just made her a co-host.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Let
There
me
you
try
go.
that again then.
Yeah.
Okay. We're in. Let's see. It's always, this is the moment of tension, right? Oh, do you see, what do you see?
We see your slides.
You see the slides? Awesome. Okay, then. So thank you, everybody. This has been a really interesting discussion this morning, and I'm happy to be able to join you virtually. If not in person, hopefully someday soon we'll all be able to work again. So I'm Liz Moran. I'm from EcoLogic. We are working with a number of partners on the St. Lawrence River Watershed Revitalization Plan. Our partners are down here at the bottom of the screen. You see the St. Lawrence River Watershed Project is kind of the spark plug behind this. Been working for multiple years to get funding for a watershed look at the St. Lawrence River, feeling that many of the other regions of New York State, the Mohawk and the Central Finger Lakes, are fairly well characterized in terms of watershed planning, but the North Country was kind of falling behind. So the Franklin County Soil and Water Conservation District has really been a major driver for this. So my firm is EcoLogic. We are supported also by Anchor QEA, who is doing wonderful GIS work with us. Roots, Matt Biondolillo, who is a friend and colleague of many of you. And this is a New York State Department of State funded project. So thinking back to how Lauren characterized the DEC's, is that better? Wylie just said my screen is not in presentation mode. Is it in there now? Do you see the Department of State slide now?
Yep. But
Okay.
we see your next slide as well, and it's kind of, you see all the gadgets below it.
Oh, okay.
We don't have the full screen. Yeah.
I see. Okay, that's not what we want. Let me see if I can fix that. I'm not adept, so.
It's not a huge deal. I just wanted to let you know.
Well, thank you. Let me see if I can fix it though, because it is going to be distracting. Because some of the slides have some detail that you're going to want to see. So now what do you see? Nothing? No. How's that? Did that change?
Yes, that's better. Although there's some bars covering your presentation.
Okay, let me get rid of this. Does that help?
Yeah.
Get rid of this.
Yeah.
Put that down somewhere else. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I apologize. You know, we're all new to this. So why are we taking this on? Why did we kind of apply to Department of State and develop these partnerships to do a watershed revitalization plan? And certainly watershed-based management is the future. And you all have seen that. You've heard presentations on that. It sounds like your organization is clearly in alignment with the objectives of that. The idea is to get clear directive for guiding not only the restoration, but also the long-term protection of our valued land and water resources. And because many of our pollutant sources are non-point sources and not necessarily subject to regulatory limits, education and partnerships are really the key to success. And just as we heard from DEC, having a watershed revitalization plan or a 9E plan or a TMDL does help open up some funding opportunities for some of our areas, and that is desirable. So let's see, next slide. Next slide, come on. Okay. So one of the first things that we talked about or dealt with when we started this project, we've been working with St. Lawrence River Watershed and Franklin County and that technical advisory committee now for maybe 16 months or so. So we've gone through kind of the watershed planning process, which is you ask the, current conditions, where are we now? What are the trends? Where do we want to go? And then how do we get there? So that's basically how we're going to structure our report. We've finished the current conditions and trends part. We've had a lot of really great discussions about the desired state, like people's vision for the future. And when, we're talking about a watershed area that is 5,600 square miles of New York State. So this is a huge area. It's very diverse, and bringing the partners together to agree on their vision, we thought was really helpful. So the vision includes things like continuing to be a source of renewable energy, of recreation, some of the values Wylie touched on about what the Indian River Lakes Conservancy provides, food production. We're certainly learning now that local food is going to continue to be an issue, right? And transportation, of course, the St. Lawrence River corridor, stop doing that, please, is a major transportation corridor, also recreation and, all of the clean water, clean drinking water, recreation, all of those. So people generally understand all of those ecosystem functions, and a lot of conversation about adaptation to changing climate, and wanting to retain the character of this real rural North Country area while still providing opportunities for economic development and their families and children to stay there. I mean, we had a lot of that kind of comments too. Also within this area, we need to resolve some issues of legacy contamination, particularly along the St. Lawrence River itself and the Grass River, and the atmospheric deposition of mercury and acid rain that affects some of our higher elevation lakes, which are within, and streams, which are within that. The desired state, people were also very clear about the needing to increase awareness as a tool, and also just being prepared for the unknown, what is coming next. So let's see if I can get this to behave. For the existing issues, there are a lot affecting the watershed. If you can see around here, we have some aquatic vegetation issues, excessive, eutrophication, siltation, maintenance of dams, development along our shorelines, mercury, agricultural issues, road salts, some of these issues that we have touched on and Lauren certainly touched on nicely with the Black River TMDL project. Our timeline, this is a classic kind of 2-year effort. So we hope to have our Watershed Revitalization Plan done at the end of 2020. We're here now. We've had a couple of public meetings, one public one and one virtual one. Now we're working on our draft recommendations, and thank you to all of you on the phone who have helped send in recommendations of projects that you think are relevant and important and you want to see included in the plan. Chastity Miller from the Soil and Water Conservation District from Franklin County has been really trying to reach out to people to convince them that sending in your plan can be useful. You know, if it's in some kind of a planning document, it may have a higher priority later on when you are requesting implementation funding. So far we're on track. We're going to have a draft by the end of the summer, then we'll have our public meeting in the fall and make necessary revisions and be done. So what we have done, and I want to take a couple minutes to go through this and maybe highlight some of the elements relevant to the Indian River subwatershed. So this map shows the whole study area. This is the 5,600 square mile area, and it's divided up. What you see is the major, the Huck 8s. So, whoops, go back. Annoying. You also see that the blue line on this graph, so that about 45% of the land area within our project area is within the Adirondack Park. And that makes a difference. And Matt Biondolillo helped us with the local laws assessment, kind of looking at how each of these municipalities across this vast area deal with issues related to land and water and protection, and was able to really discern a huge difference, of course, being inside or outside the park, but also some of the practices inside the park may be able to be modeled throughout the region. So what we did once we finished our characterization is in accordance with the DOS guidance for developing these watershed revitalization plans, we wanted to set some priorities. So the priorities are at the Huck 10 level. Most of your TMDL and 9-element plans are going to be at a more slightly finer scale. The Huck 12 unit is much more typical. So because this is such a vast study area, we are looking at the 43 Huck 10s within here, and then looking at attributes within those subwatersheds that indicate whether they're impaired, the degree to which they're vulnerable to impairment in the future, the degree to which they contain or provide important resources to the communities, or areas that have really great opportunities for improvement. And that quote is from the New York State Department of State guidelines, or guidebook. So when we started our prioritization scheme, we wanted to kind of pull out metrics that would be consistent with what's in the guidebook, but where we can find uniform data sets that would be comparable across this vast area. So fortunately, DEC and other agencies have made huge progress in terms of making all of their environmental quality data and GIS layers available online. So we are able to look at, well, we kind of sorted into 4 categories. So documented impairments, that's, you know, which of these Huck 10s have issues now? So we looked at the percentages of water bodies within the Huck 10 that are considered as impacted. So we looked at the priority water bodies listing and much of the DEC's databases for that. We also differentiated, though, between impacted by local sources like agricultural runoff, and gave that a different ranking rather than impacted waters by regional sources or legacy contamination. So we wanted to really focus our watershed revitalization plan to draw out projects and recommendations that can be locally implemented. So these regional issues like acid rain or dredging and remediation of legacy contamination of the Grass River, for example, those are under the jurisdiction and responsibility of others that are not subject to local control. So that's the documented impairments. The second category we looked at was environmental setting. So how vulnerable, this is the question of how vulnerable is this area, how protected is it? So we looked at land cover, soil erodibility, flood risk, which of course is a huge issue in the St. Lawrence. And we added a category called water resources value, because recreation and tourism and second homes are a really important part of the local economy and contribute so much to the local character. we wanted to pull out those Huck 10s that had like the larger lakes or the recreational segments of rivers and such, and give them a ranking in environmental setting. The third category we looked at was human impacts. So these are fairly, you're probably not surprised by anything on this list. So septic density, the count of permitted discharges, that's what we call speedies. Road density, the percent impervious surfaces, the agricultural lands, and the livestock density. So the extent to which we could pull out those data sets at the Huck 10 level, we have put them into our prioritization scheme. Then finally, we looked at the local capacity for restoration and protection. And this, one of the issues we have run into in the St. Lawrence is that there's a fairly high percentage of lands and waters that haven't yet been assessed. You know, you saw the numbers of DEC, just the vast number of streams and lakes to be out there. And, you know, it's going to take time for both the professionals and the citizen-directed monitoring programs to get there. So that's a challenge that will be overcome, but it may take time. And then the percentage of protected lands. So we wanted to look at the activities of the land trusts and the, like the Adirondack Park Agency areas and protected lands that we think are, they would be scored differently in terms of their prioritization for protection and restoration. So how did we do that? I mean, so we looked at all, I'm just going to show you a couple of bar charts. We had our talented team pull out data for all those and calculate for all of those 43 Huck 10s, and then array them in this kind of histogram. So again, we looked at metrics that could be uniformly assessed. So locally impacted waters. And then once we had the histograms arrayed, we kind of divided it onto 1 to 5 scale. The 1 to 5 scale is always, goes in the direction of higher score is more impacted. And then we have, and I wanted to show this in the ArcGIS application of StoryMap, but when we did a dry run a couple days ago, it uses up so much RAM that you can't do Zoom and StoryMap apparently at the same time. So what we have is some screenshots, but I want you to, you know, there are 5 Huck 10s within our Indian River watershed, and you can see them kind of going through here on its way to the Oswegatchie. So you'll see that this is the locally impaired waterways listing. So this is, as I said, from that histogram, where do these subwatersheds fall out? And as I click through these, you can see how the colors change across our whole 5,600 square miles. So we also looked at regionally impacted waters. I just have a couple you to show of how the bar charts look. And then this is how that plots out in our GIS. We also looked at natural land cover. So we see a lot of variation here. Of course, within the blue line, you see very high percentage of natural land cover, which is intuitive. And then you see along the St. Lawrence, let me go back to that. The St. Lawrence, you see higher disturbance. So the scale from blue to pink there. And then soil erodibility, again, interestingly, we see more in the highlands in some areas. And this is just the natural soil types. Then we have the environmental setting for flood risk. And of course, this is very elevation dependent. We see that this is a high issue and along the St. Lawrence and also in some of the contributing, the downstream segments of the large rivers, the Oswegatchie and the Grass and the Raquette that are flowing in. And I wanted to just show this. This was the water resources value. And this is the only histogram where we kind of pulled out some of the, and labeled, or I put some identifiers on what these, the HUC-10 codes are across the bottom. But you can see that we tried to pull out areas like the subwatershed that included Tupper Lake, Blue Mountain and Raquette Lake, Black Lake, you know, et cetera. They all get very high ranking for their recreational tourism and economic drivers. And here's how that plays out. So you see, again, high values within the park and in the High Peaks area and where the big lakes are, of course. So this is the human impact. So we started with kind of the natural environment, and now we're looking at the potential human impact. This is the permit count. So because, again, kind of predictable, low counts in the headwaters, higher counts downstream. Certainly the agricultural area, they get counted, and every CAFO gets counted because they have a discharge permit. Human impact for road density. You know, we know that road salting and increasing chloride levels are an issue in many areas. So we are, one of the ways to predict that, of course, is road density within your subwatershed. So you have that plotted out. And then another human impact, of course, is agricultural land use. And many of the listings within our big subwatershed for potential sources of impairment relate to agricultural land uses. This is how that plots out. And again, this is probably intuitive to everybody who knows the North Country. You kind of know where the flatlands are, where the agricultural areas are, and then where the forested areas begin. Livestock density, you kind of get a very similar picture. You see some clusters there. Percent impervious surface, again, this kind of goes with population density and development. And the local capacity for restoration, protection, and protected lands comes out here. So we have a lot of protected landscapes. And then we have combined all those through the magic of GIS and math into a final weighted score. So the darker areas within showing up on the map are probably the ones that are going to be scored as higher priorities for the Watershed Revitalization Plan itself. So because we're looking at this at a fairly high level, you know, the HUC-10 level, we have some general watershed recommendations for restoration and protection, collaboration, partnerships, outreach, education, and then things that municipal actors can do. So addressing agricultural challenges is certainly going to be important. As I mentioned, this is a potential impairment in many of our subwatersheds. Ag is a leading industry in land use in St. Lawrence, particularly the northern skirt of the St. Lawrence River, where you have the great soils and flat plains. We have a lot of livestock density, so manure handling can be an issue. We've been working with the soil and water conservation districts closely, of course. They're interested in not only manure management, but things like prescribed grazing and livestock access to streams and such. So those types of recommendations will be in our watershed management revitalization, you know, the implementation plan that will be part of our watershed plan. But we're trying to make sure that, particularly with the ag community, that our recommendations are reality-based and achievable. So this is an issue that we face in all of our 9-element plans as well, that you don't want to run a scenario that says increase cover crops by 70% or something if your soil and water conservation districts are telling you that that's not a viable alternative. So, we're trying to really keep it as specific as possible, even though it's such a broad area. And the only way to do that is through the kind of communication and partnerships that we have in place. And I really, again, I want to give a kudos to Chastity Miller from Franklin County Soil and Water, who has been a real leader in making sure that we stay realistic on the ag side. Floodplain and stormwater management, of course, when we asked people what they worry most about in St. Lawrence, we had a lot of comments about flooding. So they find ways to harden existing areas and plan for the future. Invasive species, this is a great prism kind of picture here. So there are 2 prism regions that fall within the St. Lawrence River watershed. We have, let's see, Emily can pipe in if I get this wrong, SLELO and APIP, who are actively doing the early detection, rapid response, and surveillance for that. Municipal strategies are going to be important. Again, this is a level where we can really, I think, make good connections through our partnerships and through outreach and just doing a lot of listening to our municipal representatives, ways to prevent erosion, stormwater, road salting, all of that practices. Wastewater and water management strategies. Many of the impaired segments that we're seeing have listed potential nutrients from on-site septic systems. And so we need to make sure that that gets addressed. The cities, some of them still have residual CSO issues, but they are many of them are being remediated now. And then just getting ready to meet climate change and flooding needs. So we're also going to have recommendations related to learning more about what we need to know in the future. So water quality research, planning, and monitoring. Again, collaborations are key. Supporting long-term monitoring programs such as CSLAP and the PEERS program that DEC runs. And providing more opportunities for citizen science engagement. And I think that this is an area where we can really see some great partnerships across the not-for-profit sector, the universities. The fact that Clarkson is now a Center for Excellence in Clean Water, I think is going to be really helpful. So monitoring, mobilizing, education, and then tools. We're going to have a lot, I think, of recommendations related to that. And community engagement. So as St. Lawrence was kind of late to the party in terms of the large watersheds, they can certainly learn from others. The Mohawk River, for example, has an annual conference. And now we know that Indian Lakes has an annual water quality management conference. So is there a way, maybe through Clarkson or some other venue, to have a way to check in on progress on the St. Lawrence River and have all the researchers and monitors and regulatory community talk with each other? In the Mohawk that is hosted at Union College, it's been really successful. And then we've also had suggestions about watershed related curriculum and teacher training. So I you know, I was interested to hear Wylie talk about the summer camp and to think that maybe something like that could be extended. So I'm sorry for the techno issues, but here is our project webpage. And you will find the documents that we have produced to date, contact info. There's a recorded webinar that we did on April 15th that went through in much more detail where we are and how we have arrived at that place. So that is my last slide. So I will stop sharing and then go back, let Wylie take it.
Thank you, Liz. Great presentation. We'll open up to anyone that has any questions. You can type your questions in the chat box. I've got one I can ask you while we're waiting for folks to type in. Well, maybe Lauren could have answered this, but I think you could probably address it as well. Last winter, Andrea and Sarah, our Project World advisor, and I toured the Philadelphia water treatment plant. And we got to see how it all operates. It's really pretty impressive. Great staff. They gave us a great tour. They mentioned that the phosphorus monitoring that they're required to report, there's not really mandated by the state as what number that they need to be below for their monthly reports. And I know that the TMDL for Black Lake, the TMDL plan that Lauren discussed, will establish a number that they need to be below. And how does, my question is, how do they determine what they're currently monitoring at what level for their discharges? And maybe Emily, I'm not sure who could chime in, but I'm just curious. Thanks.
Do you want me to start? And then DEC can chime in maybe? You're talking about a wastewater treatment plant, right, Wylie?
Yep, correct.
Okay, so they have a speedies permit and they must have a monitor only requirement. That's what you're saying. They don't have a limit, but they monitor.
Correct.
Okay, so probably as the TMDL is developed, if it turns out that the budget, the phosphorus budget for Black Lake would benefit from a reduction in that point source, then DEC will move to modify their speedies permit accordingly and probably, likely establish some kind of a phosphorus limit.
Yeah, it was refreshing to talk to them because when I mentioned TMDL to the operators, even kind of the lowest level equipment operator knew what I was talking about. And they said, yes, it's coming. We just don't know what the numbers are that we're going to need to get below. But yeah, they were excited to figure out what they needed to do to meet it for sure. So that was enlightening and reassuring.
Yes, and presumably if they need to upgrade that wastewater treatment plant to meet a new limit, they would be a priority for funding to support that.
Nice.
Wylie, my understanding is that under New York's water resources law, that within any Great Lakes watershed, that wastewater treatment plants are required to limit their phosphorus loading to 1 milligram per liter per day.
It depends on how big the plant is. You're right. The limit for discharges to the Great Lakes was set by international agreement at 1 milligram per liter but then if the Philadelphia wastewater treatment plant falls under a certain threshold of maybe 1 million gallons per day or something, it could be exempt from that. But all that will come out in the TMDL.
Great.
And I can check with David Rarick to learn more if you'd like. He's our regional water engineer.
Right. Yeah. He
Thanks,
was,
Alan, for sure.
We have another question for Liz in the chat box. Is collaboration with Ontario and Canada part of the process of creating the plan?
yes, we have, I mean, it's the lake, our study area is the New York portion, of course, of the St. Lawrence Basin. But we know that the other side also drains in, right? So we have been fortunate to have participation from our Canadian friends. And if I say it's Save the River, I hope that's the right one. No, it's not the right one, says Wylie. But yeah, yes, we do have a not-for-profit on the from Ontario. Emily, do you remember the name?
Yeah, it was the St. Lawrence River Institute. They had done a survey of their own to determine, you know, public engagement and interest in on improving water quality in the St. Lawrence watershed on both sides. So we were able to share, you know, some of our information, and they were able to share some of theirs. So that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a nonprofit up north in Cottage Country area around Kingston, and that they are very in tune to improving the local habitats around their lakes, riparian buffers, things like that. And definitely, in fact, we had a speaker from their organization that was going to speak at this year's conference, but they'll be at next year's conference. So maybe we could learn some things from what our neighbors up north are doing. But they're very much in tune to water quality, from what I can tell up there. And obviously they're implementing the same concepts that we've discussed for the last hour or so.
I have a question from Jim. Jim, go ahead.
I have a quick question. I'm a liaison for a small village in Western New York, and I'm responsible or the liaison for public works. And in that public works, I have to deal with wastewater treatment. And the numbers that Emily just shared are the same numbers that we have to reach. That 1-to-1 ratio is our goal on a pretty much a daily basis on the discharge from our septic system. Or sewer system, excuse me.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? And we can open questions up to any of the presenters. You want to ask Wylie a question, you can.
I just remembered the name of the group up north. It's called Watersheds Canada. And I just put it in the, and you can Google it. They really have some really impressive programs and manuals. If you live on a lake, things that your lake can be doing. So it's a pretty neat organization. And again, next year, we're gonna have someone down to speak for them. Any other questions? Well, great, thank you. Everyone, I'll tell you what, let's do before we wrap up, and I think this will be kind of unique for posterity's sake. I can grab it on, we do an annual photograph every year of our attendees in front of the Learning Center. So I'm gonna take a selfie here with, maybe I don't, I think I can see myself on the screen. So everybody turn on your cameras and smile so we can put this in our history log. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right, hold on. I got to move my screen over. I didn't get all of you. All right, here's the other half. Are you ready? All right, 1, 2, 3. Great. Tradition continues. No, a great conference. Thank you to Liz and Lauren for joining us today, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of a nice summer morning. we look forward to seeing most of you, all the familiar faces, as you come up at some point during the summer. For those unfamiliar that are on board, stop in and say hi, shoot us a note, get involved. It's a great organization, great group of people. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming. This is our most well-attended conference so far. So great. It's great to have
Wylie,
everybody on board.
Could I make a
Sandy,
comment?
our board chair, has a word or two here.
Just a very quick comment. It's fabulous to see so many people interested, and the water is something that ties us all together here. We do have some ideas of various different projects that we're going to try and do over the summer that we couldn't cover in this conversation. But if you contact Wylie, we've got some really interesting ideas of things we want to do, real action things we want to try and do, and learning things we want to do. So this isn't over just because we're done with this today. This is the lead in to the rest of the summer. And hopefully we'll have some fun stuff to do and maybe a little outside help here and there to help us get it done. So thanks for everybody for coming on board, and we'll see you around the lakes and the area. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.